we try to then bring in that global aspect? Because that is something that we're very, very passionate about, and the historical part, because people have a tendency to think that the church just showed up lately. Like it's a 5-minute culture. We can't see really too far in the back. I was talking with Oz Guinness, and that's what his big lament was, is we've detached ourselves from history. We don't understand history. How do we then communicate to a society which seems to live more on TikTok than it does on their understanding of world history?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that I have the best solution to that. I mean, at one level,
let's come up with it together, Trevin. Let's do it right now.
Chesterton has that line that is one of the most dangerous and most uncomfortable things for a man to do is to think. And this is why hardly ever anyone does it. So I think
he was so good with the quotes, little one-liners. I love
there's a line for everything. Like that's the thing. There's a witty line from him for everything. No, but I think it requires a certain amount of both patience and humility. And those are two things that being online all the time are actively fought against. Patience, because everything is a quick fix culture. Like you said, I mean, you have everything just in a moment's notice. It's a TikTok video, it's a 10-second reel, that kind of thing. And then humility means you'd have to not only recognize that you don't know everything, but also recognize that the greater adventure in life is not discovering and inventing your own personal religion, but in submitting to something outside of yourself, to actually putting yourself under the scriptures, or in covenant with a local congregation of believers, recognizing that there's this 2,000 years of Christian history that cannot be jettisoned, that should not be jettisoned, but that actually needs to be considered, and then I think with the global church, I mean, nothing is more formative, I think, for people than having strong connections to people in other parts of the world. Because when you get to know people from other parts of the world who love Jesus, worship Jesus, have a very high view of the scriptures, want to submit to the scriptures, you very quickly realize what things are essential versus non-essential. Because believers in other parts of the world do not see American politics the same way that we do. They don't see the same categories that we do. They may have differences of perspective or posture based on the kind of culture that they're seeking to be a witness in. And so, there's all of these conversations going on about what should be the American, what should be the church's posture to, culture change in the United States? Or are we moving back into this moment where we really need culture warriors, or do we need to seek, convictional kindness kind of a thing? Like there's all these debates over the posture. And I just don't think those debates get solved by just listening to Americans pontificate. I think we need the rest of the global church to offer perspective in those ways.
What do you think some of those things that they offer a perspective on?
Well, I think it's very easy for Americans it's very easy for us to confuse some of our idiosyncrasies, just those things that are sort of specific to an American context, to things that are like specific to or we can think that those things apply everywhere in every way. So
give me an example. Give us an example.
Yeah. So, I mean, for example, the particular view that many Americans would have on, I've used this example before on like capital punishment. There's a lot of Americans, especially conservative Christians, who see capital punishment as not only biblical in principle, but also in practice, and would question really the ethical stance of any believer that sees that differently. Whereas you go in other parts of the world, Romania would be one example, where a lot of the believers in Romania, coming out of a dictatorial regime where capital punishment was used against all kinds of people, unfairly, would say, why would you ever want to give the government that kind of power? Like, that's not something that, and they're not necessarily argue against it biblically from the standpoint that there's no biblical justification for it. I think Romans 13 would make that to be a biblical justification, but would almost say, similar to the way that, many Christians in other parts of the world would say, that it's biblical in principle, but not always fairly applied in practice. So that it's permissible, but not necessarily commanded, right? So, that's something that I remember as a young person being shocked by, because I realized, oh, that sort of position that I had in my head was sort of just the biblical position is actually a position that, I mean, you can debate whether or not it's biblical in the way it's applied or whatnot, but it's one of those things I realized that's not an essential. Like that's not something like that's actually something that Christians may have questions about or disagreements about or wonder about the prudence of in having to figure out how to apply it. And so there are all sorts of issues like that where you take you move away as you move away from where the Bible is super clear, to areas of wisdom and judgment. There are brothers and sisters in other parts of the world who just apply things differently, like that. In the US, a lot of believers would be against, and maybe for good reason, for prudential reasons, against like universal health care. There are other parts of the world where Christians are the ones who've spearheaded that. So it's just, it's not, and again, I'm not saying anti or for. I've actually seen, government paid universal health care in places where it's really gone really poorly, and then other places where culturally, because perhaps the size of the congregation or the size of the country, not congregation, the size of the country or the demographics of the country or how it works, where it's actually been more effective than in other places. All of those but that's all debate that can be had, right? Whereas a lot of times in the US, I think we tend to take certain political positions and we move away from principle of caring for the less fortunate, the needy, the sick, building hospitals, things like that. And we sort of harden into a particular view, and it sort of begins to be seen as this is the really biblical view. And anyone that would see this differently is probably, we wouldn't question their salvation necessarily, but question their wisdom or their judgment, or do they have, and I think opening up that global conversation then allows you to treat brothers and sisters even in the United States that may have differences of opinion when it comes to, some of those prudential political questions with more grace and charity, because you recognize, yeah, I may have really strong convictions on this, but this isn't an area of orthodoxy. This is not a pillar, so to speak. It's more of something that a church that the different people in a congregation could see this differently.
So they could agree to disagree on, but there's some some judiciousness, I hope, some charity, as you said, and all where we talk about Augustine and
yeah,
charity,
but at the same time, it goes the other way. A lot of Christians in the United States today want to say, we can agree to disagree on issues related to the definition of marriage, for example. And in that situation, that's where basically the global church comes back and says no. And the church throughout history says,
no,
what are you thinking? So I mean, that sort of connection to the global church broadens your view on certain issues, but then also really narrows and targets your view on other issues where you recognize, no, we would be out of step, not only with the church throughout the last 2,000 years, but also with the global church around the world, if we were to make a change on this particular issue. So that's why you need that perspective, so that you're able to have those conversations and to recognize what are the places where we really need to be able to say, here I stand, I can do no other. And then where are those areas where it's like, yeah, I'm standing here and you're standing there, and it's okay. We're brothers and sisters, and we can continue along in partnering in mission and all sorts of things. Those are issues, I think, where we really need the wisdom of church history and the global church.